Welcome to Your Path to Nonprofit Leadership, the weekly podcast that features the very best in career development in the nonprofit sector. I'm your host, Pat McDowell, and I want to help you build a plan to become the kind of leader you want to be. Now, whether you are a current nonprofit leader or maybe want to be one, you're in the right place. I'm glad to bring you these weekly conversations with experts in our sector who are going to help you develop a plan to move forward. Now, if you would, do me a favor, find the share button. Usually it's at the top of the episode graphic within the device you're holding right now, and share this episode with just one other person so we can continue to build a global community focused on nonprofit leadership. Well, I had another fantastic conversation in this episode with Shiloh Karshima, who has had a remarkable career in the nonprofit sector, and her global perspective spans 14 different countries. She now resides with her family in Nigeria. And while her story is fascinating in and of itself, she brings great practical advice for you as a current or perhaps aspiring nonprofit leader with ideas you can apply wherever you and your organization are located. Some of the things Shiloh and I discuss include: how do you communicate effectively when your key constituents may cross different cultural, political, and socioeconomic boundaries? How do you create partnerships, important partnerships, between your nonprofit and the for-profit and governmental agencies in your community on which your key constituents really rely? Shiloh has in fact had to work through all of those challenges and has had remarkable success, and has had to be effective as a global fundraiser, which she also adds to this conversation and will certainly give you ideas and resources to consider. Lots of reasons to check out the show notes for this episode. It's number 154. Just go to the podcast or the news blog at pattonmcdowell.com, and you'll find all of the resources Shiloh and I discuss, as well as more information on the great work she's doing through the Leader Team, leaderteam.org. And by the way, she has a fantastic podcast you need to check out. It's called Practice Good. Speaking of resources, it's a good time to check out all of those on the pattonmcdowell.com website, especially if you might be interested in our Mastermind Leadership Development Program. We are about to fill up our 2 summer groups within that seasonal cohort. We're also looking ahead to the fall. So if you are indeed interested in a virtual development program to help you design your nonprofit leadership journey, I've got the answer for you. Check it out at the Mastermind page within the pattonmcdowell.com website. Without further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Shiloh Karshima. Shiloh, thank you for joining me on the path.
Thank you so much, Pat. I'm so glad to be here.
I'm really excited about this conversation. You have a fantastic story and literally global experience in nonprofit leadership, and you've learned so many lessons. I know you have great advice on strategic topics that our nonprofit leaders who are listening are going to benefit from. And so regardless of where they are in the world, I know you will add value to their thinking and maybe give them some other things to consider as they move forward on their path to nonprofit leadership. So given your experience, and I think it's at least 14 countries, Shiloh, if I did the math right on all of your wonderful background, what do you think is the biggest challenge that you and other maybe nonprofit leaders around the world are facing right now?
Yeah, there's so many. I think of two big ones. Number one, harmonization between not just different NGOs and nonprofits, where we're kind of duplicating the same things in different areas and not really relying on one another's strengths and supporting one another, but also just between governments and NGOs and for-profits. We're not working together well. There's so much that we can do better if, for-profits began to see the social impact of their bottom line, and nonprofits began to see that, hey, we have opportunities to generate revenue and to make a bigger difference. So I would say harmonization is probably biggest, but the second thing, very close second, would be communication to diverse stakeholders. What I mean by that is, if you are working in an international NGO and you're fundraising from another country or a group of people that don't understand the culture and context in which you serve, oftentimes your language has to change. An example of this is here in Nigeria. What we do, we speak in one language for our audience here, but because of where we are with media and social media, and really you can get any information instantly, I have the same audience. I have Nigerians, but I also have all my donors, funders, and stakeholders and board members in other countries that are looking at the same communication channels. And essentially, it makes it difficult as a nonprofit or NGO leader to communicate to the audience in the way that they understand the best. So my language has to change and shift. An example of this would be, we did some work with a CPA back in America to help us with the IRS and a bunch of different things with our NGO in the US, which we've registered, but we also had registered in Nigeria. And the way that we communicate in Nigeria is that we are helping people who are struggling to find jobs, struggling to find work. We help them start businesses and become entrepreneurs. Well, I used that language with our CPA and she was like, I don't understand how that's charitable work. Like people go to school for entrepreneurship all the time. Like how the IRS isn't going to understand this. So I had to change my language. I had to say, we help poor people put food on the table for their children and their grandchildren. And then she understood it. And so we're sharing communication channels. So it makes it difficult to fundraise. It makes it difficult also to give dignity and to give honor to the people that we serve, because we have to find like a common language, and we end up losing some of our ability to communicate correctly to different audiences.
Those are two fantastic headlines to start with, and we'll unpack both of them. Love your term harmonization. I hear a term, collaboration and other kind of alliance building phrases used, but love that you have had to literally get into that both with the NGO sector as well as with governmental entities, and of course communication. And I'm thinking, well, you have to cross literally international borders. I still think that applies, doesn't it, Shiloh, even to a kind of a local nonprofit, being sensitive to the different audiences, right? I guess you've had to be very intentional about the audiences that need to hear your message and translating accordingly.
Absolutely. I mean, before this, I was working at a nonprofit in the US, and the people we served, I mean, we were in Central Florida and we served similar to here. We helped people who were struggling in the cycle of poverty to get jobs, keep jobs, and get promoted. And the way that we communicate to our donors is very different than the way that we wanted to communicate to our participants. And so it became an issue. It became difficult, especially when those two groups of stakeholders are in the same community. So, you have your participants who start feeling belittled or feeling like, oh, you're talking about us like this.
Right.
And you're going, oh, that's actually not how I feel, but this is how the donor hears it and sees it. If I change the language they'll think nobody needs help, nobody needs funding, nobody needs support. So it's a very delicate balance, whether you're local or international. It's definitely an obstacle.
Yeah, well, we're going to talk more about that because you're right. I think there's increased awareness of that kind of need to better articulate and represent the voice of those we serve. But you're right. Sometimes we're in that kind of tug of war, right? Where the donor maybe wants a more pity-oriented story, and yet we don't want to diminish the people we serve because they're not looking for pity. They're looking for help and a hand up. But before we go there, Shiloh, I got to ask, how did you get into this work that now has you in Nigeria at this moment? It's a fascinating story. How did you get started?
Yeah. So, I have been, this takes me all the way back to childhood. I have been my heart has always been for the kid in school who was left out, the kid who other kids didn't want to hang out with, the kid who was, in the Special Olympics. That's always been my heart. I've been drawn to people that were overlooked. And I think it just kind of stemmed into my adult life. And there was a season where I traveled around, backpacking and serving in orphanages. And I kind of had this wake up call moment where I thought, I have held enough babies and I know enough names of people who are dying. Like, what else can I do? How can I be part of the solution? And so I went from this place of volunteering for some incredible organizations to saying, I now get to equip myself to be a person who becomes part of the solution. And so I started looking to schools, started looking into organizations I felt like I would like to be a part of, and looked at who they hired and what type of degrees those people had, and began to prepare myself for a life of nonprofit work.
Clearly, you've done that and done that well. And it leads, of course, to my next question, because I think there are listeners maybe that have been touched. Maybe it's something during the pandemic, or that they're reconsidering their career path. So you were touched and inspired by your travels and the work that you did as a volunteer. So what'd you do then to turn that into a profession? Were there some early things you did in terms of kind of learning or certifications, or what did you do to help you feel more confident to tackle this as a profession?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think I kind of had this realization shortly after getting my bachelor's degree. And I was in a master's program that wasn't along those lines. And so one day I just made a decision I may not be able to change the world, but I have one life that I can use to become an advocate for the things that could change. And so I began to research schools that were known in this industry, that had skill sets that would teach me a skill set that were really powerful and would be an asset to NGOs and nonprofits. And I ended up going to New York University and studied public administration, nonprofit management, and international economic development.
Yep.
And school was incredible. And during that time, they really taught me, like, get your skill set and know what you do, because helping people is one thing, but having something to offer in the field is a whole nother level. So that was huge for me.
Were there certain skills, again, that you learned early on that were important? Because you're right. I think a lot of people get into the field and they have a passion for the cause, but they don't necessarily have the skills of management and leadership and all the things that you've had to deploy. But as you go back then, Shiloh, were there certain skills that, like, yeah, I had to learn this or that to become more comfortable?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was one of those, young kids who was just in love with everyone in the world. And I wanted to help everyone and save the world. And let's just all be friends and family. And I had really nothing like tangible. I felt like I had no tools to do so. Like I'm like, I want to do something great, but I'm not a teacher. I'm not a doctor. Like, I can't stitch up a wound. I don't have a skill set. I'm not a mechanic. Like, I didn't know what to do. And so I really focused a lot of my skill acquisition on program evaluation, because number one, it fascinated me. And number two, it was like something that I could tangibly offer an organization. And through my travels, I saw a lot of different programs throughout the world where people had great intentions, but when you start critically thinking about some of the things we were doing, you're like, is this really producing the results that we are telling people they are? And how do we become accountable? And with all these donor dollars, how do we become accountable for the dollars that are being spent? And is the program working? And so I was fascinated with that process. And how do we accommodate for the things we spend? And is this program actually producing the results it says, or is it just 5 fluffy stories,
Yes,
So
yes.
That was a skill set that was huge for me. I think in addition to that, leadership is always a skill set that we get to work on. It's always people, managing people. It is conflict management skills. It is being able to say hard things and having hard conversations, even when it's like a great week, learning that if you have a day without a hard conversation, it is probably a really great day, because if you don't want to have hard conversations, then you really just want the title. You don't want the actual work of leadership, because it's not easy. It's hard.
And you've demonstrated that. Yeah. And I guess that leadership in particular, obviously that's a topic that is on my mind a lot, as the title of this podcast would suggest. And so you learned leadership skills, but I guess you had to experience them too, right? Or how do you develop your leadership skills? How do you build those muscles, if you will, that clearly you've had to do?
Oh man, the school of hard knocks.
Right.
A lot of leadership I feel like that the things that I have learned have come through very, very difficult days,
Yeah.
It's one thing to read John Maxwell books day and night, and those are great, but it's another thing to apply those things. It's extremely hard to have to be in organizations where you learn how to not only manage the people under you well in a way that makes them feel loved, valued, supported, and that you are their best friend on their team and you want them empowered through this. But it's also another thing to manage up. And so oftentimes we forget that, right? We're in positions throughout our career and we think that things are just going to be, I'm now in the career that I want and things are just going to be hunky-dory good all the way up. But then you find out you have a boss that you're like, wow, this was supposed to be great, but this person might not have all the pure motivations I thought they did, right? And we get stuck and then we start looking for other jobs. But I think there's something key about those moments. Like I've learned some very powerful leadership skills in moments where I've had some of the worst leaders. And I've been able to take that and learn how to manage up as well. They think they're my boss, but there's been ways where I've been like, I'm going to take this as an opportunity to see how I can, what I call enroll them in this new concept. If I can enroll them in this idea of treating their staff better, then today we have a win, right? So leadership and management is not just about position and, who's under me, but it's also about how people want to follow, even those above me would say, okay, I see what she's doing and I want to be a part of that. And it comes from hard days and good days, but people management is not easy. It is.
Yeah. Right.
It is learned through the day in, day out.
Right. And of course, the cliche of managing up is something we talk about. But I love the way you articulate it in a way that is thoughtful and would encourage someone, even if they're more senior to you on the org chart, to follow you. And so I wonder, again, is from a tactical standpoint, you sound like you reflect thoughtfully on experiences, both good and bad, that's helped build your leadership even further. I mean, are you one that, are you a journaler, or are there ways literally that you have kind of taken the hard knocks into a way to translate them into future success? Or how does that kind of manifest itself?
Yeah, absolutely. So there have been days where I'm like, what am I doing in this organization or that
right.
project? And then I go, okay, you got it exactly right. I journal a lot. I also will use those days to write some notes down about things I'm learning and how I want to be as a leader and what can I do out of this. And I'll use that for podcast episodes. Like I will use that.
Yes.
How can I help people? People ask my opinion, and I get opportunities to share with people every day that there are things that we can learn even when situations aren't perfect. Like even out of this, we can learn something.
Yeah, I just think that's such a good mindset, and a growth mindset, frankly. As Carol Dweck would say in her book, that, you realize that, hey, there's nothing that necessarily has to stop you from your progress, but you need to learn from it, right? And accept those hard knocks days and see how it can help you be more effective, tomorrow. Shiloh, let me switch gears on you for a bit and talk about what exactly is the leader team. I think you've alluded to it in some of the work you're doing now, but talk about what exactly is the leader team and what are you doing for folks that don't know what that organization is all about.
Absolutely. So, with the leader team, our mission is to to build communities by empowering leaders and creating jobs. So our whole purpose and hope is that we can empower people who are struggling through the cycle of poverty to not just wait for jobs or look for jobs, but to create them themselves, and then to become the leader that enables their employees that they hire. So it comes from kind of a story behind us. My husband is Nigerian. We met in the US and we would go back to Nigeria, every year for, a few times every year. And over a period of time, we began to really, our eyes be open to, there's so much wealth in Nigeria. It's responsible for the most wealth in Africa, but it's also responsible for the most poverty in Africa. So that socioeconomic gap lives out a lot in the fact that people can afford they'll go to university and then there's no jobs. And decades later, people are still looking for work. Right. And you've got all these intelligent, innovative, creative, hardworking people that have literally been 15 years without any work, and their kids are walking around with, big bellies and skinny legs, and you're sitting here going, what is going on? You walk down the street and, one person, they're getting paid $20 a month, but you can literally turn around and go to a restaurant that charges you $70 for a meal for a family of four.
Yeah,
so the
crazy.
gap is so deep. Exactly. And we just really developed a passion for these are our people. My kids are from these tribes, and we thought, what if we can take what we're doing in the US and change it from just how do people get jobs, but how do people create their own jobs? And then how can we help them build their businesses to a place to where they can hire people, give them a living wage. And so not only can we impact one person by helping them create a business, but they can hire 5 to 10 people. And that is how many lives changed, right?
Yeah.
That's if they hire
Huge.
10 people, plus they each go home to 5 to 10 family members. So overnight, we've taught people that they're worth investing in, that that they can do it, that they have dignity. And we're also giving an example to the community that you can be successful in business and you can still pay people a living wage and honor them in solidarity as humans. So we have a mentorship program where we train 15 people to start their own businesses and build their own businesses. We also do trainings for other NGOs and capacity building. We also train for-profits on how to grow their social impact bottom line. And we're actually creating some new projects right now. We're looking at doing a once a month career and opportunity advisement day open to the community. Also doing something like a TED Talk, but for innovative ideas that will help lift people out of poverty. So we've got our hands in a few things. And then we have kind of a social enterprise type of arm to this. My husband and I also own a steam cleaning company where we sanitize and decontaminate hotels, hospitals, businesses, cars, and a barbershop and spa. And those go to
Wow.
those go to fund the nonprofit. And also we pay and give an example to the community that you can pay a living wage to people and still be successful.
Yeah, you practice what you preach, don't you? Literally, in terms of your business.
We knew we couldn't do this without that. People would go, well, who are you?
Right.
You don't know what it's like here. And we're going, yes, we do know what it's like. And a lot of people pay under a living wage because they know they can. There's no jobs. So it's almost like slavery,
Yeah, they can get away with it, right?
Jobs. Exactly. They know they can work people for 70 hours a week on $10 a month, and they're walking away with hundreds of US a month. So this shows an example of how do we treat people with dignity and in solidarity, in partnership with humanity. And so our hope is that it's cyclical and it pours into one another and is an example for a different kind of leadership in Nigeria.
Yeah, it's fantastic. Well, and that was my next question. I guess right now, all of your programming is within Nigeria, but obviously you're on to something and perhaps a model that could benefit neighboring countries. Or what is you and your husband's vision for the leader team?
Well, right now we're registered as a 501c3 in the US. And then in order to do the work in Nigeria, we had to register a separate NGO here in Nigeria under the Nigerian government. Okay. We're not registered in any other country, but I think that it can easily translate to some of the surrounding countries. Nigeria is a very special and difficult place to work. There's a lot of corruption, like systemic corruption from the top of government all the way down to the clerk in the grocery store. It's just part of culture.
Yeah.
It's survival. And so I actually think if we take this to Kenya or something, we might actually have an easier time because
you built it in a hard environment, right? Yeah. You've had to develop this in the most
hard environment.
Right. Well, and it sounds like you mentioned this earlier, Shiloh, the fundamental kind of concept, your value of harmonization. And you've had to literally utilize that there in Nigeria in terms of, we'll talk more about that, how you make that happen. Because to me, that's applicable to nonprofit leaders anywhere, both NGO to government, I guess NGO to businesses. But how literally have you gone about this concept of harmonization and building the organization you have now?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the first things we do, just harmonization with other NGOs in the area. We've, partnered with other local organizations. What are you doing in this area? We don't want to come in and be the big guy who's like, oh, we're here to save the day. And then other people are looking around going, we've been here for years. Like,
Right.
you're not saving anyone's day, like, so in our first few months, we were here just meeting with other NGOs, just making sure that we're not stepping on toes. If there's any way we can partner and use our funding to support what they're doing, if there's any overlap, like, let's do it together. Why not encourage everyone? And you realize that a lot of other NGOs are really struggling too themselves. So the more partnership you can have, the more you can take your different skill sets, combine them, and reach a wider audience and touch more lives. So that's number one. Government is its own beast.
Yeah, right.
There are some good NGOs out there that their entire work is just to learn the policies, learn the government players, learn what's happening, and actively educate and keep the NGOs that are in the area up to date, and also kind of lobbying for them in the government. But government itself is its own kind of beast, because depending upon where you are, there might be somewhat of a political game involved, and you have to figure out how to honor that game in a way without becoming a part of it. And it can definitely be difficult. But in the US, there's a lot of great opportunities to work with the government. The government has all kinds of contracts that they create policies for that they don't actually implement themselves, right? So we as NGOs get to go and bid on those contracts or prove that, hey, if I produce this, it takes away from certain statistics that you're wanting to change. And I can prove to you that by investing in my program, then you are able to decrease some of those statistics in your community. And you can actually give them some factual proof, and they will create money for you. So that's kind of cool with government there. So I think there's ways to overlap, there's ways to partner. And then in terms of for-profit, I just think most people, it is not common for for-profit leaders to think that they have much influence kind of in the social sector or
Right.
for the social bottom line. I can tell you, I've been part of like Chamber of Commerce, where you sit in a circle, and I think there was one day I was in one where they went around the circle, and there was kind of, you answer this question of, what do you do to impact the community? It was some month we were celebrating a holiday or something, and I started, and at that time I was working for a homeless children's program, and I began to say, well, this is what we do. And literally one by one, there's probably 10 of them. They went around the circle and they said, well, I can't compete with that. All I do is marketing, or I can't really hold a candle to hers because all I do is fix cars. And I wanted to stop them in the middle of it and be like, wait, hold on.
Yeah, there's more
There's so
than
much you can do. Yeah, we're struggling with marketing right now. And I have people that need cars fixed and don't have cars. And like, how can we partner to make a bigger social impact? That marketing company can come alongside and donate one of their staff for 5 hours a week to help us better our impact in the community. That mechanic can come alongside and help a single mom that is struggling to, be stable because she doesn't have a car and put her kids in school, and they can donate that work that costs them only labor, right? So there's so many ways to partner together. And I think we don't always know about them. We don't always think naturally about them. We think, oh my gosh, I took this pathway in life and now I want to give back, but I don't know how. So I volunteer copying papers at the local SPCA, but I'm not fulfilled. Well, take your skill set, and go alongside of an NGO or a project in your community and say, how can I serve you? I will donate my time to help you kind of grow in the area that I'm gifted at. And there's so much we could do together.
I love that. And I guess I'm curious because as you noted, you're swimming upstream, right? The momentum, at least historically there, has not embraced harmonization. It has not embraced some of these concepts. I'm curious, do you feel like you're making progress? And how do you make progress going against that cultural tide? Maybe is it just these even small examples of progress that the government now is seeing that you're doing good work, or how are you kind of going up against some of these institutions that probably have not, favored this kind of thinking in the past.
Yeah, it is. It's difficult because usually, with government, you have bureaucracy. With for-profits that are doing pretty well, they're usually built on several years of a foundation of principles that have gotten them there. And they're usually not social bottom line principles.
Right.
And so getting people to consider that their work can have influence with people and can change lives is like, sometimes for us as nonprofit leaders, we think it's just so natural, but for others, it's like so foreign. Like, are you kidding me? I had no idea that existed.
Right.
And so I think in building relationships, that is the key. I have sat with some CEOs and presidents of companies, huge, big companies in the US, telling them about what we're doing. And they've donated here and there to different organizations, helping children, feeding people, those types of things. But when they heard about the work we're doing, like, we are building entrepreneurs, I didn't have to use the phrases that we talked about at the beginning of this. I didn't have to tell them I'm helping poor people put food on the table. I said, we're building entrepreneurs, and they got it. Like, they immediately they're like, this is how to change the world, because they know what it did in their own life, right? They know that they came from nothing to something because they built something through hard work. And they're like, you are turning around and teaching people to do that exact thing. Like, this is what I want to invest in. And so I think stories are huge. If you can show people that it works, if you can show people passion, but you also have to have numbers to back it up, people will begin to see. And it is a long and hard road. Like, I am convinced that I am extremely hopeful, but in my lifetime, this will not change. My hope is that it will, right?
Yeah,
but I will probably go to my deathbed and we'll still have these struggles. But my hope is in that the few that I can touch, right? The few people that I can convince that this is a new way of being, we can do this, that would change entire lives. And I know I'm like super rambling here, but I have one example of this that I think would be really valuable to your audience.
Sure.
In moving here to Nigeria, we are connected with a gentleman who really, he started with nothing. He was poor, he was in poverty, and he taught himself agribusiness. He grew his agribusiness to where it's so big, where he's one of the biggest exporters of sesame seeds, ginger, cashews to the Asian countries, and some in the US. And he now is a multimillionaire in US dollars. So he's come from nothing and he's made something huge. And we've become his friend. I go to his factory, we hang out, we talk, and I began to tell him about this idea of social enterprise, that you can actually use your business to change lives. And he was so blown away. Like, he had no idea. He's like, tell me about this. And I said, well, you could choose to open an entire factory and only employ women whose husbands have died. Like,
yep.
You could choose that, because no one else in society is hiring them. And these are women on the streets selling ground nuts, which is peanuts, ground nuts.
Right.
And you could employ them full time, give them jobs, take them out of the heat and the sun, and give them a place to work that gives them dignity. And he literally, this is actually, when I was in the US, we would tell him about this, and I was just dreaming out loud, right? I move here to Nigeria. I go to his factory. He goes, well, this is a new arm that I've opened. I literally walk through and there's hundreds of women. And I look at him and I say, what is this? And he said, well, remember that time you told me about hiring widows? I hired 400 of them.
Gosh,
and I'm like,
fantastic.
Wow. So you don't even know what conversation will change lives. You might think he's a stubborn man, he's stuck in his ways, she doesn't this or that, and you never know who will walk away and change hundreds of lives. So you just keep sharing the vision and the dream, and I think it will catch fire with the right people. You just can't give up.
It's a fantastic story and evidence of, you don't necessarily get short-term results on that. And back to your earlier point, Shiloh, being an effective communicator as you are, you just didn't even realize the seed you planted in his mind, right? To embrace this. And it leads to the question, which you may have already answered, but how you do how do you raise money for your philanthropic causes? Obviously, you've got a great presence in the US, but I wonder, have you been able to have any philanthropic breakthroughs there in Nigeria, given, the challenging socioeconomic conditions that I'm guessing, is there even kind of a spirit of philanthropy given those challenges?
We have not quite broken into that yet. When you have a country that has had decades and decades of poverty, then the political leaders come from a place of poverty too. And when they get money, they take that money first thing and ship it to other countries and hoard it in banks because they're afraid that their children and grandchildren will be in poverty.
Yep.
So essentially all of the money, it's this cycle of, like poverty syndrome. It's, you have leaders that have suffered and they're scared out of their minds to suffer and their children to suffer. And so instead of putting money back into roads and infrastructure and programs, they're not. So Nigeria is extremely difficult. I think there are other countries that are doing it that are a little bit more progressed than Nigeria. But overall, we have been exposed to some of the grant cycles here. There are some government grants that we are looking to apply for. But as of right now, our donor base is international. And we're hoping to get to a place to where we can run even without donations, even based on our for-profits. Once they pick up some more steam, that we will be able to fully fund all the work through this social enterprise itself.
I was going to say, and you're a great example of that. You're not going to be dependent on philanthropy because you're creating the earned revenue streams, right, in addition to the contributed revenue streams. But I was going to ask you, how do you manage what is literally an international fundraising operation? I guess you're utilizing, did you say earlier, maybe you have board members from around the world that I guess help you network philanthropically, or how do you raise money given that you're not able to do as much there locally?
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, we got to a place in our lives before we actually started this. We had for-profits here in Nigeria, but solely for the purpose of creating living wage jobs. We didn't have our NGO at the time. And we literally decided we're selling everything and leaving. And we had no money. We had nothing promised. We had no way of knowing that
no guarantee, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. We had nothing. And people began to ask us, like, what are you doing? Like, are you guys crazy? Like, what are you doing? We're in the middle of a pandemic. You're selling everything and you're moving to this, like this place that sometimes people are afraid of, right?
Right.
And we're like, we just can't live afraid. We have to do this. And we share the vision. And it's crazy when you begin to share your passion. There's so many people who desire to live beyond themselves. And they begin to say, how can I help you? How can I support? And actually, I spoke to someone the other day and he said, get so good at telling your story that eventually you'll be sitting in someone's living room and they will be able to write a big check. And it's all the small checks that matter, but there will be a big check person, but get good at your story and be passionate about what you do. And for us, that also happens. Like, we have some incredible board members who have literally become our champions. And they have, when we go home, we usually go home for Christmas every year. And when we go home, they will literally set up meetings for us and invite all of their CEO friends, all of their president friends, all of their people that have compassion and empathy, and they'll do dinners for us. And we just come and share the story. And we get our annual budget through those types of meetings.
That's fantastic. And kudos to you for, being on the ground literally and helping the people at a direct family level, but yet organizing what is an international operation. And it starts with communication. It starts with the harmonization you've created there locally, and certainly still building on it. I guess, Shiloh, as I think about kind of final advice for a listener who maybe like you feels like, I do want to help change the world, but I don't know how. Is there any other advice you'd offer someone listening that, like, I guess, first of all, you have to take that leap of faith, right? You took you and your husband, a literal leap of faith, selling everything and moving to Nigeria. But is there any other advice you'd offer to someone who's like, yeah, I'm ready to help make a difference as well?
Yeah, I think we kind of alluded to it a little bit throughout, is just gain a skill set. Wanting to help the world is great, but we all have compassion, so take your compassion and find a task that you can get so good at that you can get better than anyone else, and you can offer that as an asset to an organization. So that's huge. All of your compassion is going to help you be a great leader, but you also get to have a skill set. And then, like you said, leadership. Learn how to, I hate the phrase deal with people or manage people, because really people can't be dealt with or managed. Like, learn how to love people. And when you love your team and your staff, you will listen well, and you will accommodate for their well-being and their health. And I have led organizations where I have said, you know what, the people and the population that we are trying to reach are definitely our priority. But me as an executive leader, my priority is this team of 12. And if I can love this team of 12 very well, if I can help them understand that their personal well-being is more important to me than gaining all of the population that we hope, I care about them individually as a person, and not just about my mission and utilizing them for my end goal. They are my end goal. And if I can radiate that message to them to where they feel that as they work every day, they will also in turn do that for the people that we serve. And so at the end of the day, when I'm serving hundreds of people, I'm actually serving 12. And if I can serve those 12 really well, then I'm doing my job, because they're going to fall in love with our people just the way I've fallen in love with them. And so I think leadership, listen, love well, and truly care for people. Don't use people as a means to an end, but know that they are the end.
Beautifully spoken, as I knew you would. And Shiloh, thank you for the inspiration you are to our listeners and to, of course, folks around the world who can make a difference. And of course, you're giving us a path to do that even more. Clearly you're a lifelong learner from your earliest days in education. I bet you've read many books that have been meaningful to you, but I wonder, is there one, and I know that's an unfair question, but is there one book you might recommend to our listeners that's been meaningful to you that you would also recommend to them?
Yeah, there is one that I think not a lot of people know about, but when I found this book, I just fell in love with it, and it has helped me so much because it's so practical for people in the helping profession and the nonprofit world. It's called Changing the World Without Losing Your Mind, and it's by Alex Counts. He was one of the founders of the Grameen Foundation, which worked with Muhammad Yunus. He's wonderful. He's been in philanthropic and nonprofit world for decades now, and he personally has been through experiences of burnout, of not taking good self-care, so many things, and he's taken all of those lessons and put them into little short snippets of lessons for people just like you and me. And I think if we're going to be in this work for the long run, we get to learn how to take care of ourselves. And so I would say start there. It's so good.
Love that. I'm not familiar with it. I'm delighted to add it to my list, and I would encourage our listeners to put that on their list as well. So, Shiloh, thank you for that and all of the wonderful words of wisdom you have offered in this episode. Where can people go to find out more about you and the great work you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of places. People can go to theleaderteam.org, and that's our website for the work we're doing here in Nigeria. Also, I have a podcast called Practice Good, and we talk about these concepts of social enterprise. And not only that, but how do we take care of ourselves as people doing the work? How do we have good soul care and self-care along the way? So those are two great ways to start.
Delighted to lift both of those up. And again, thank you for your emphasis on self-care. I've talked to many leaders, as I know you have, Shiloh, that they are burning themselves out, right? They are not practicing self-care. So I'm delighted that you are literally devoting your podcast to the self-care that our colleagues in nonprofit leadership need to embrace. So thank you so much for all that you're doing and for joining me on the path.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor to be here with you guys.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Shiloh as much as I did and came away with some practical ideas, not only to guide you on your personal career journey, but also help your nonprofit organization be more effective in its communications and especially in achieving those strategic partnerships that will help you move forward. Don't forget to check out the show notes for this episode. It's number 154. Just go to the podcast or the news blog at pattonmcdowell.com, and you'll find much more about Shiloh, the great work she's doing around the globe, based in Nigeria, and other resources that she and I discussed. If you haven't already, make sure you subscribe to this podcast. While you're on the podcast page, look for the follow button. Follow equals subscribe. And you won't miss out on any of these weekly episodes with leaders from around the world. It comes out every Thursday morning, and I don't want you to miss any of these great conversations. By the way, you can also scroll through all of the conversations that have preceded this one with Shiloh. Also, just look at the podcast page. You can hit on the button called Episodes, and that'll allow you to look at thumbnail summaries of every of the now 154 conversations this podcast has produced. Thanks for all you're doing in the nonprofit sector, especially right now, and keep up the good work for causes that are most meaningful to you. I'll keep bringing you content that can help you do it even better. Have a great week, and I'll see you next time on The Path.